Thank you, Madam Chair. And I too rise to speak to this bill, and I'd just like to flag I'll be moving a second reading amendment to this bill to do with recycling, which is very, very important, and make sure that we clean the mess that this bill will create. And of course, I just want to reiterate Senator Brockman's words there, that this is nothing but a transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. Just this week, the Australian Financial Review came out and said that this tax break could be worth up to $30,000. $30,000 for the rich people who can afford to buy an electric car, and that's going to come out of general revenue, which means that the poor, the lower income earners will have to pay more taxes just to balance the budget. Now, I thought, when we've been hearing here from Senator Wong, she's not here today this afternoon, which is a shame, that renewables are cheaper. So can somebody tell me this, that if renewables are cheaper, why do we need to be giving up to a $30,000 tax break for every new EV car that is bought? I mean, that is absolutely absurd. And I can tell you something, if you want to look after the environment, the best way to do that is to have a strong growing economy. And there is nothing productive about giving a tax break on cars that are going to be driven around the inner city that might have a mileage of a couple of hundred kilometres if you're lucky. We're going to be having extension leads running out over footpaths, hanging up over trees. I mean, the stupidity, we've seen this in Sydney already, where people are trying to charge their cars on the street, with on-street parking. I mean, how dangerous is that? How dangerous is that? And for what? For what? Nothing but a pipe dream, because these people want you to believe that we're struggling under global warming. And we've been told that yesterday by the CSIRO, who've come out and said that the temperature has risen by 1.47 degrees since 1910. And I must admit, when I first heard that figure quoted in question time yesterday, I nearly fell out of my chair, because just back in 2018, and I remember these numbers, just like that, the CSIRO and BOM said that the temperature has risen by 1 degree in 2018. So in 108 years since 1910, these guys say the temperature has risen by 1 degree. Now they want us to believe that it's risen by another 0.47 of a degree in just the last 4 years. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure it isn't hotter this year. The last 2 years have been cooler and wetter than the prior years prior to 2020 and 2018. They were quite warm years, I'll accept. But the last couple of years, things have actually cooled off a bit here in Australia, certainly in the East Coast, along the East Coast, even up in Cairns. I was up in Cairns earlier this year and it was like down to 7 degrees. They were complaining they had to put jumpers on for the first time in their lifetime. That's how cold it was at the Cairns show. Never happened before, people wearing jumpers at the Cairns show. Isn't that right, Senator Scarr? It just goes to show. And of course, it's interesting. I have to note here that Senator Wong isn't here, because she called me a coward yesterday when I questioned these figures, and that somehow who was I to question the BOM and the CSIRO? Well, I'll tell you who am I to question the CSIRO and the BOM, and that is someone who has studied statistics both in senior, at university and in my postgraduate degree. So I'm very well versed with statistics, and I'm very well versed with record keeping. And it's very important to note that the record keeping that the BOM undertakes has nothing to do with science. It's purely record keeping. You take a measurement, you write the number down, and you store it away for posterity. You don't start creating multiple data sets, not changing the initial data set, you create a new data set, and then you report the whole new data set. And you don't have to take my word for it, because back in 2011, there was an independent peer review done on the BOM's observation practices. Now, you can look this up. It's a really important one. I haven't talked about this in years because I've been distracted by a few other issues. The Australian Climate Observations Reference Network Surface Air Temperature Acorn Satellite independent peer review. Okay, report of independent peer review panel, 4th of September 2011. And I want to come to the key paragraph in all of this, because they do acknowledge that the Bureau of Meteorology is very good at homogenisation. Now, that is doublespeak for modelling, which is doublespeak for fudging, right? And I can talk about economists. I've had dealt with economists all my life, and there's a big rift between accountants and economists because we don't like modellers. We like people that measure real things, right? So let me take to the key paragraph here. The World Meteorological Organisation guide states that an acceptable range of error for thermometers, including those used for measuring maximum and minimum temperature, is plus or minus 2 degrees, 0.2 degrees. However, throughout the last 100 years, the Bureau guidance has allowed for a tolerance of plus or minus half a degree for field checks of either in-glass or resistance thermometers. This is the primary reason why the panel did not rate the observation practices amongst international best practices. So there you have it, Senator Wong. I know you're not in the chamber, but if you're listening, check it out, because this was the review that you obviously commissioned. It was either yourself or Greg Combet back in 2011 when you were the Environment Minister. Okay, so not my words, independent peer review, 2011. And one of the first questions I asked in estimates as a young whippersnapper back in 2019 was to the Bureau on whether or not they'd reduced that margin of error, and they hadn't. Plus or minus half a degree is 1 degree, right? Minus half a degree on the low side, plus half a degree on the top side, that is a degree. That is exactly what they're claiming up until about 2 years ago. So the so-called increase in temperature is purely within the margin of error. I could go on, but I just thought that needed to be said for the record after that insulted an imputation from Senator Wong yesterday about me being a coward. No, it's actually all written here. Now, the other thing we need to talk about here is that somehow renewables are cheaper. And I'd really like to know on what basis the Labor Party and Senator Wong, and I've heard the member for Sydney, Tanya Plibersek, say it earlier this week on TV as well, that renewables are cheaper. Now, that's an interesting comment to make, because when I was in estimates, I asked Senator McAllister how many kilometres of transmission lines are going to have to be built to reach the 43% reduction in CO2 by 2030. And lo and behold, Senator McAllister had absolutely no idea. Here's the range we were given, somewhere between 5,000 kilometres and 28,000 kilometres. Okay? Can you believe that? That is a massive range. And I just want you to think about, if we've done 28,000 kilometres of ripping out, scars across the beautiful countryside, it'll both be farmland and native forest, is that good for the environment? I don't think so. I don't think scarring the landscape with transmission lines will be good for the environment at all. But that's not all. We'll also be getting the death of eaglehawks, bats. Bats are, with bees, one of the key pollinators of our native plants in this country. But no. In the name of reducing carbon emissions, carbon dioxide, by the way, is recycled naturally, as I said the other day, every 4 years. That's all free. That's true. If you want free energy, come back to photosynthesis. But I digress. Let's get back to the batteries and talking about batteries, because I can tell you, if you think transmission lines are going to be bad for the environment, and solar panels and wind turbines, wait until you break down what goes into building a battery. Lithium is a 1% ore body. That means you've got to mine 100 tonnes of the ore to get 1 tonne of lithium, and that involves an intensive electrolysis process to actually get the metal out of the ore. But that's not all, because you can't just go down and get the ore body out of the ground. You've got to go round and around and around in those big mining trucks and the big, caterpillars and everything else that picks up all the dirt and cart it out. So you can often have a stripping ratio of up to 10 to 1, which means to get 1 tonne of lithium metal, you might have to shift 1,000 tonnes of dirt. And guess what? That's just one of the many metals that even goes into a battery. Okay, you've got other things like aluminium, you've got steel, you've got cobalt, and, cobalt, the world's biggest producer of cobalt, Democratic Republic of Congo. Well, how do they get their cobalt out of the ground? That's right, child labour. Child labour. Gee, that's going to be good for the environment. I mean, it's bad enough that, all of these so-called renewables, which they're not, none of this stuff recycles naturally throughout the environment every 4 years like carbon dioxide does. It's also a human rights issue. Okay, because it's going to be bad for the children in the Congo and who knows what other countries. And of course, it's obviously the human rights issue here, because we're transferring $30,000 every time a new car's bought from the poor to the rich, from the working class to the wealthy. And of course, that is what the Labor Party and the Greens are today. They are the party for the inner city, self-loathing, virtue signalling, rent-seeking elites. That is what they are. You know, I well remember a former Labor Prime Minister said, you know, God save the Queen because nothing will save the Governor-General. Well, let me say, God save the King because nothing will save the Labor Party from the working class when they have their, you know, nose driven into the grindstone by the increase in taxes and the economic pain that is going to come from higher energy prices, and watching as the, you know, urban elites drive around with their electric cars while, you know, the working class is struggling in their petrol cars. And they're not, you know, and it's not just a handout of $30,000 for a car. It's also going to be the fact the working class are going to have to pay the fuel excise, okay, because these electric cars aren't going to have any fuel excise. So we're going to have a user toll on them. And then on top of that, I mean, good luck to you trying to actually get your car charged. I was actually reading an article on the weekend someone had sent to me where there's now recharging rage in the UK because people have to wait so long to get their car charged that if someone accidentally bumps into the queue, they've been waiting here for 3 hours, you know, they're starting fights at these recharging stations. It's not like, you know, with an internal combustion car, you just pull up, fill up your tank and drive away. No. And I tell you what, it won't be too long before there's another bill in here where we're suddenly going to have to start building the recharging stations. I guarantee you that's what will be happening, right? No sooner had the ink dried on the 43% reduction in carbon dioxide by 2030, and what have we got? We've got another handout here with the fringe benefits tax for renewable cars. I mean, and it'll just keep on coming, Yeah, I'll guarantee you that Rewiring Australia fund of $20 billion, that'll have to be increased because there was modelling showing the other day it was about $2 billion or $1 billion for every kilometre of transmission line or something, some astounding amount. It was estimated to rewire Australia to get the 43% was going to cost something like $100 billion. So the $20 billion rewiring fund is not going to cover it. And if you think that the private sector is going to stump up $80 billion their own money, forget it. Forget it. Unless, of course, it's superannuation money. It might be, they might get there that way where they, you know, if it's bad enough that they're, you know, you've got to pay fuel excise, but now, you know, you've been forced into paying 12% super, right? You're never going to see, our young people, don't think you're ever going to see your super again because they are going to blow it, right? Because these super funds are driven by ideology, not productivity, ideology. Right, this ESG stuff, right? So, you know, and they're all bought, you know, we've got the Marxists in the boardroom now, you know, they're not driven by productivity, they're driven by ideology, and that is a sure recipe to send this country broke. But I just want to touch on one other thing. These electric cars are going to be up to 800 to 1,000 kilograms heavier. That is going to increase the braking speed, right? So we're going to have more car accidents, right? Because your braking speed is going to be much heavier. The weight of these cars can increase by 20 to 30%. We're going to have to use more energy just for the car to travel around because they're going to have massive batteries. And these things are solid bricks, right? They're solid bricks. I mean, imagine the impact of getting T-boned by cars, especially here in Australia. Actually, I just was talking to a famous Queenslander of the year 1986, Russell Strong, who did Australia's first liver transplant, and I'll let you guess why we got in touch. He's on my side, by the way, if you're wondering. But yeah, Australia, the reason why we have more liver transplants in Australia is because we drive on the left-hand side of the road. So the driver gets T-boned and obviously, you know, damages the liver, and that's why, yeah. So anyway, so there's going to be more liver transplants, you know. But the other thing is, what about the southern hairy-nosed wombat? When all these inner-city elites from Sydney and that are driving down in an extra, you know, in their new EV cars and they're going down for their ski trip. I mean, the member for Warringah, I mean, she had a lovely career growing up, travelling the world, you know, competing in ski trips. What happens to these guys, our little marsupial friends on the road with increased braking speed? Are we going to have more deaths of southern hairy-nosed wombats because of these electric vehicles throughout the winter season, with all the elites driving these heavier cars with longer braking distance? And what about all the extra rubber pollution off the tyres and all the extra brake wear? What about that? Have all these people looked into this? And then, of course, then there's the cost of recycling. And who can remember Larry Marshall's famous words and estimates when he says, and I didn't ask this, he actually proffered this himself, was that it's going to cost 3 times the amount to recycle a battery than it is to actually, for the materials that actually go into it. Right, now, what's the chances of that actually ever being economical when the cost of recycling something is 3 times more than the cost of building it? I tell you, it is not going to happen. This bill will not only destroy the environment, it will destroy the economy and it will destroy our country, and it is just another step on the path to destruction because of this useless Albanese Labor government.
Authorised G. Rennick, LNP Chermside.